Hi Hugo,
Hi Pietro.
and hi everyone. So this is updates from NimibLand, and what we will be talking about. So first it's you, right, Hugo?
Yeah, I will have a quick intro to Nimib.
Okay, to remind for those who do not know it, and then we'll have a special Nimib speaking hours session, and we'll tell you what is that about. And in that session, we'll talk a little bit about NimibLand. Then it's back to you again.
Yeah, and then I will talk about the updates in Nimib slides since last time.
Great. And then I'll finish up with a quick intro to NimibBook, which is something that we never presented at NimConf. And that will be all. So, off to you, Hugo.
Thank you, Pietro. I will now have a quick intro to Nimib. I will first go through the bare basics, and then I will show a more complicated interactive example. So, what is the most basic thing you can do? Show text. And using NBText, you can provide it with a markdown formatted string, and it will produce stuff like this, which is pretty neat. And then you can also show code. And using the NBCode template, you can then provide the code block that you want to show, and Nimib will show both the code block and the printed outputs from it, like this. Here we have the code block, and here we have what was printed in it. And that was the basics. And now on to a more complicated and interactive example. Here we have a game of whack-a-mole, and about once a second the green button will change. And if you hit it, I missed it. If you hit it, you get a point. And if you hit any other button, nothing happens. So how does this work? We're using the capability of Nimib to embed JavaScript code inside your documents. And in this case, we're using Carex, which is a Nim library for front-end development. And using NBCarex code, we can compile all of the code inside of it into JavaScript, which is then run in the browser, like in this case. And yeah, I will go through this code quite quickly. So if you want to have a closer look at it, you can either rewatch the video later, or you can look at the slides, which we will link to. But here we define three variables. First, the score, which we can see up here. The active button index, which decides which button is the active one. Like right now, button 0 is the active one. And right now, button 1 is the active one. And the -1 we set it to because then none of the buttons matches. So it starts off with no button activated. And then I have a variable for number of buttons, because if I wanted to, I could change this, and as we will see later down, it would be as easy as just changing this number. And then we create an update function, which will run once every second. And what it does is that it sets the active button index to a random number between 0 and the number of buttons. So it basically just picks a random button once every second. And then we have the click handler. So when we click a button, this function will run. And the input is the index of the button. And that's the number you can see in the middle of each button. And if the index matches the current active button index, we have clicked the green button and we increase our score by 1. And we also reset the active button index. And then we have a utility function here that helps us render a button. And the input is again the index of the button. and we create a variable where we check, is this button active? And then we apply some styles. For example, if the button is active, we make it green. And that's what all of this code does, but I will just skip through this because I don't see the point in going through CSS in a Nim talk. And then we use the build HTML function from Keras, where we create a button with an on-click handler, some styles, and the body of the button is the text representation of the index. And up until now, we have just defined stuff. We haven't really rendered anything yet. But that's where Keras HTML comes in. It allows us to render actual stuff. Like, for example, this header with the text score, and then we use string interpolation to insert the score variable that we defined up above. And here we can see it. And then we create a div, and inside it we loop over the number of buttons, and we render a button for each one. So as you could see, if I just increase the number of buttons to, for example, 10, it would just create 10 buttons for us, and it would work just the same, which is pretty elegant in my opinion. And yes, there have been some past talks about Nimib. For example, Pietro's first talk, I think, in 2021 about Nimib. And then me and Pietro did a collaborative talk, the last NimConf. And here we went through the interactivity features more thoroughly. So if you want to know more about that, you can check out this talk. And I did the talk on creating presentations using Nimib, and specifically Nimib slides, which builds upon Nimib. And as you might have guessed, this presentation is of course created using Nimib slides as well.
This is a special episode of Nimib Speaking Hours. This is something that we have started to do right after last NimConf. And we have actually done a while. I don't remember how many. And you can find all the notes about the Nimib Speaking Hours in the discussion tab of the Nimib project. And how many did we do, Hugo?
I think including this one, we have done 13 in 24 months.
Well, that's not too bad. And actually, at the beginning, we also tried to have guests, right? I think we had a couple of them or more.
Yeah, I think we had 3. Vindar, Federico, and Lesnov.
Okay.
Has been guests.
Yeah, that has been great. We haven't pushed too much about having guests later, but we have also a usual agenda to our Nimib Speaking Hours. What do we do usually in Nimib Speaking Hours?
Yeah, at first we just have a random chat. We can talk about how our week have been or stuff like that. Then we talk about what has happened since last time, what we have worked on and stuff like that. Then we discuss issues that might have come up, or we have reviewed PRs or commented on issues. And then we plan what we'll do until the next meeting.
Okay. Yep. So this is a special edition, but the idea is more or less to go over this. And most of the stuff that we have done since, let's say, the last time of NimConf is something that we'll be presenting today. But something we want to talk about during these Nimib Speaking Hours is this NimibLand concept. This is, on one side, it's an organization, and we have this cute logo of the tail of a whale in a coffee cup. It's actually inspired by something I saw on my daughter's shirt. But so the idea is to move all the Nimib related projects to an organization and sort of way to make it less personal and make it easier for people to contribute. Um, and one other thing that I want to call out about the number of things that we've done since the past is this nimi.py. Because in these past few years, especially last year, I've started reflecting about where to take Nimib, and one of the possible direction is to support also other languages. And so this is the first experiment I've done, which is basically this. You see a classic Nimib document. The only thing you see this weird print. And this is because it's actually done with Python code, and this was generated entirely in Python code with a Python package which is not yet published, but which reuses all the Nim code thanks to NimPy and NimPorter. So that's one of the direction that we will probably go into next. And yeah, that's part of what we've been doing. And we usually go over in speaking hours on the issues, pull requests, we comment them, we reply them. So it's a nice moment for us to make sure we haven't lost anyone who's asking for us. But then we're not doing this time. What we want to comment a bit, one of the things that is something that we are a bit stuck on. There is this big pull request who has been going on for a while. That is a major change in how we implement NB-block, which is the basic block of Nimib. The idea is to make it more flexible, to support container blocks, to support also serialization to JSON, and we have discussed, we've worked on this mainly meaning at the beginning. Now I passed a little bit to Hugo, but this is one of the things that is partially blocking some of the development of Nimib. So that's one of the things we plan of working on in the next period, and also about completing the migration to NimibLand. So I think that covers it all. Have I forgotten telling anything, Hugo?
No, I think you have covered all.
Okay. Good. So now it's off to you with Nimi slides.
And now some news from NimibSlides. And one of the big improvements we've made is that we have improved the documentation. More specifically, we have added tutorials with embedded examples. And I will now show you 2 examples. Here we have the documentation page, and we list all of the examples here. And this one is about layout, which mainly covers the column features on Nimib. And we can see here that we have first a block of code, and then we show embedded here an example of what this code looks like. And we can see that we will expect to see 2 columns in the first one and 3 columns in the next one, which is what we see. But let's now look at the more exciting example, the animated lists. And once again, we have a piece of code, and then we show what it looks like. And I often go back looking at these tutorials when I'm making a presentation, because I forget all the time how all the features work. But it's really easy to just go back here and look up what I need, and then just go ahead and implement it in my slides. And a new feature that we have added is the auto animation API. And what is auto animation, you wonder? This. You saw it? The header didn't just disappear and reappear like it would in, for example, PowerPoint, but it moved upwards to give space for the content coming in underneath. And that's auto animation. And the way it works is that we divide the animation into frames. And I, for educational purposes, show the frame number down here. And it starts at 1. And then you can decide how many frames you want your animation to be. And yes, let's look at this example. We have here a line which will be shown up and until frame number 2. So if we step forward, we can see that it will stay. And we can also see that we have a new line here that will be shown on frame 2 and 4. Interesting. But now when we move to frame number 3, both of these will disappear because none of them satisfy the condition anymore. And now we have a new line which will be shown on frame 3 and onwards. So we will see this one for the rest of eternity, basically. Where eternity ends, where the animation ends. And on frame 4, we can see that this line has reappeared because now it satisfied the condition again. And then on frame 5, we can see that only this line satisfies the condition. And why would you want to use something like this? That just looked weird. And this was an extreme example that I mainly have there to showcase the different features of the API. But here's a more realistic example. And the idea here is that I would only want to show some pieces of content at a time on screen. And then when I'm finished with them, they will disappear from the top and new content will come in from below. And we start off here with just this example 1 text, but then we add the NimibLand logo. And now comes the really cool part. I will now remove the example 1 text and add in new content from below. And as you see, the image moved up and shrunk to give space for the new content coming in from below. Look at this again. I find this really satisfying. Big image at the bottom, smaller image higher up now. And when we now remove the image, we can see that the text and the header moved to take that into consideration. And when we now move the example 3 and 4, we can see that things center again. And then we can have a last slide where we can just summarize everything we talked about, for example. And in this case, this usage example. But now let's go back to the less pretty example and show you how the code looks like. And the basics here is that you use auto animate slides and then you give the number of animation frames that you want to use. And in this case, we have 5 frames. And then you can do 4 different things. You can do just normal Nimib commands without doing anything else. And those will be shown on all the frames of the animation. Like in this example, the auto animation header will be shown on all the frames. Then you have show until, show at, and show from. And show until shows its content up and until the frame that you specify. Show from does the opposite and shows the content from the frame that you specify and onwards. And for all the combinations in between there, we have show at, which you can specify specific frames if you want it to just appear, disappear, and then reappear. And you can also specify ranges for it, which I will show in the next slide. But let's just go through this example once again, now that you have seen the code. Show until frame 2 will be shown until frame 2 and then disappear forever. Show from frame 3 will appear at frame 3 and stay with us. And then show at frame 2 and 4 will appear, disappear, and reappear. So let's go through it again. We are now on frame 1. Now on frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, and frame 5. And now, show at. I said that you can pass in both discrete integers, but also ranges. For example, and you can also combine them. Like in this example, we only want to show this string on frame 1 and 5, the first and the last one. We want to show this string on frame 2 up and until frame 4. And we will want to show this one on frame 3 and 5. And yes, from this you can probably guess that we are using sets behind the scene. Yeah, we're using set syntax. So you can pass in sets if you want to do this programmatically, but in all other cases I would recommend just using the more convenient way of just passing in everything directly to show at, because we will handle that for you behind the scene. And you can combine these in the same. So you could have it at frame 1, then frame 2 through frame 4, and then frame 5, which would basically just be all frames, but you get the gist of it. And now let's look at this. So we are now on frame 1, and only the first one matches the conditions. Now we are on frame 2, and only the middle one matches the conditions. Then on frame 3, the middle one and the last one will match. On frame 4, only the middle one will match. And then on frame 5, the first and the last one will match. And that was everything new from NimibSlides.
So this is a quick intro to NimibBook. What is NimibBook? Well, Nimib works to produce single documents from Nim file. What about if you want to showcase a collection of documents, like a static website? This is where NimibBook comes in, and you can hear the excitement from the public here about NimibBook. So, what is NimibBook? It's a minimal static site generator for Nimib, which uses a feature of Nimib which is called theme, which allows to change how a Nimib document looks like, customize it completely. But what kind of theme do we pick? Well, we basically took a very good existing one, which is called NimibBook, and we ported to Nimib. And that is what NimibBook is. So if NimibBook is a port of NimibBook, now I have to explain you what is NimibBook. NimibBook, you might have heard of it because it's quite popular static site generator done in Rust with, in a sense, a single book theme. It has multiple CSS themes, but basically the site that you build with NimibBook looks always the same. And that's good because it's simple to use. And you also have very minimal customization. You have very few things that you can pick. And that's a great thing for productivity. The less you have to pick from, the more you're able to make it work. So let's look at an NimibBook example, and one that maybe is about Nim. And there is a very nice repository by Exmonader, Nim Days, which has a number of experiment and implementation in Nim. And this shows you how NimibBook can look like. This is the light theme of NimibBook, and you see there is a table of contents, and every page has some content. And in this case, you see some Nim code and some output of this Nim code. So how do you go about and producing a book like that with NimibBook? You basically need two things: the table of contents of your book, which is done through a markdown file, which is called summary.md with NimibBook. And some lines are not used. What is used is the bullet list with the title of the chapter and the source file of the chapter. And you already see that all the source files will be markdown files, because the second thing that you need to produce a book with NimibBook is some content in a markdown file. And this is how the content will look like. And if, for example, the content is about Nim and you have some Nim code with some Nim output, you will have to take this Nim code from a Nim file, run it, and copy and paste the output. And this is one of the ways where NimibBook can help. Because NimibBook is exactly that, helping you not copying and pasting Nim code and showcasing your Nim libraries. And one example is actually the first example that started the creation of NimibBook. And NimibBook is actually the second project right after Nimib started, right after a few months. I think it was Klonk who said, we could use it to showcase the scientific Nim libraries. And this is an example of ggplotnim, a library started by Vindar. And that's where we started creating NimibBook. And this is one of the other CSS themes, the navy theme, which is darker. And how do you go about producing a book like this with NimibBook? Again, you need two things: a table of content, and NimibBook does not support yet the summary.md because it was easier not to write a parser for a markdown file and do something else. And NimibBook does not yet come with a binary. When you install my NimibBook, you have an NimibBook binary. What we did instead, because it was easier, is to make you bring your own binary and your own CLI command line interface. So you just have a basic DSL to express your table of contents, in which you have your entries with the title and the source file, and you have entries that start a section and with title and source file. And source file can be both markdown, because it doesn't make sense to use Nim code when you can just process markdown, and Nim files. The one without extension or with the Nim extension are assumed to be Nim files. So this is how you express the table of contents of your book. And the content is usual Nimib content. So you init your notebook, your Nimib file, and you just tell it that you want to use the NimibBook theme. And this is the usual content that is taken actually from Signing. So this is an example of an existing NimibBook book. So how do you start with NimibBook? Well, it's not very much harder, because basically you start with a Nim file with the talk. So the first thing you start is, okay, I will want to write these two chapters, an introduction and an example. One in Markdown and one will be a Nim file. And you pick a name for your Nim file. Here I picked talk. In the NimibBook documentation, we call it NimibBook. In Signim, it's called Getting Started. You can pick whatever name you like for the Nim file expressing your talk. And then what you do is you run talk init. Nim talk init if you want to compile it, run it at the same time. Once you run talk init, you have that in your folder, alongside your talk.nim, you will have a configuration file for Nimib and NimibBook, a prepared docs file with some assets that will be used for your published site, and a book source folder in which we already created the index.md and the example.nim. So this is something that will be created when you run talk init. And your example.nim will have some boilerplate code. So, and the TOML also contains some basic defaults in which you have the default directory for the source file and the default directory for the output of your site, and some default setting for NimibBooks. This you can change them here, and there are other settings from NimibBook that you can look into the configuration, such as, for example, setting your GitHub repository URL so that it is shown in the top right corner in NimibBook. Once you have run talk init, you can run talk build already without having produced no other content, and talk build will create an index.html which is created from the index.md, an example.html that is created from the example.nim, and a book.json, which contains the metadata for your website. In particular, it contains the table of content, because so this is actually the first file that gets produced by talk.nim, getting the configuration and the table of contents. It will produce a book.json, and then when you run any nim file, the NimibBook theme will look up for a JSON file and will use it to inject in the example HTML all the table of content on the left. And if you want to learn more, of course, NimibBook has a documentation in NimibBook, and you can learn about some of the other commands that you have and some of the configuration and different things that you can do. So this was a very quick introduction to NimibBook. Everybody's excited, and thank you. And I think we are at the end of our NimConf presentation.
Thank you, Pietro, and thank you all for listening. I think we are done now, so have a nice day.
Yes, have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.